But let me tell you the most important reason growth matters. It's not even anything else we've discussed. It is that growth is foundational to opportunity. Growth is foundational to impacting the ability of those struggling to climb the economic ladder to achieve economic and material success. For a long, long time, I have advocated what I call opportunity conservatism. Now, what does that mean? It means that we as conservative, every domestic policy we think about, we talk about, should focus like a laser on opportunity, should focus like a laser on how does it impact the least off among us? How does it impact those struggling to climb the economic ladder? Let me urge you, as you think about and as you defend conservative principles, to focus like a laser on what does it mean for the least off among us, to view things through a Rawlsian lens. Now, what's a Rawlsian lens? Well, there was a political theorist, John Rawls, who hypothesized that if you were behind what he called a veil of ignorance, if you didn't know what position you would face in the world, what world you would be born into, what country you would be born into, who your parents would be, he hypothesized that behind that veil of ignorance, you would be concerned critically with the impact of policies on the least off among us. Now, I actually think that's a very useful foil. Now, Rawls was a left-wing academic, and so he concluded the answer was socialism. But Rawls was wrong as an economic matter, but he wasn't wrong in terms of who to focus on. The American free market system has been the greatest engine of prosperity and opportunity the world has ever seen. And let me tell you right now, one of the saddest things among a lot of conservatives is that there is, I think, what I'd call a false consciousness. That's a term from Marxism, where a lot of conservatives believe the lies the left tells. The biggest lie in politics, I'm convinced, is that Republicans are the party of the rich. That's simply not the case. Look, the rich, big business, they do great with big government. Big business gets in bed with big government. What's happened under the Obama administration? The rich have gotten richer. The top 1% are wealthier now than they were when Obama was elected. Who has gotten hammered? Who are the losers under the Obama economic agenda? It is the people who are struggling to climb the economic ladder. It's young people, it's Hispanics, it's African Americans, it's single moms. You know, under Barack Obama, Hispanic unemployment climbed to nearly 10%. African American unemployment to nearly 14%. Youth unemployment, age 16 to 19, over 25%. Why is that? Because when you're hammering small businesses, and 2/3 of all new jobs come from small businesses, when you're hammering small businesses with $1.7 trillion in new taxes, with massive regulations, the people who lose aren't the rich. The people who lose aren't the CEOs. The people who lose are those who are just struggling, those who are just starting. The people who are losing their jobs right now because of Obamacare are young people, are Hispanics, are African Americans, are single moms. They're the ones getting their hours forcibly reduced. They're the ones seeing health insurance premiums skyrocket. They're the ones seeing their employers drop health insurance coverage altogether. What is absolutely critical for climbing the economic ladder is robust economic growth. When you have an environment where small businesses can survive, where they're creating jobs, that's what impacts more than anything else those just beginning to climb the economic ladder. You know, it's interesting. If you look at the distribution, socioeconomic distribution in 1990, if you look at the top quintile, the top 20%, and the bottom quintile, the bottom 20%, 10 years after 1990, the bottom quintile, the bottom 20%, 60% of those people in the bottom quintile had moved up. In that same decade, 40% of the top quintile had moved down. We have an incredible economic mobility in this country, an incredible ability for each and every one of us to achieve anything, absolutely anything, based not on who our family is, not on who our daddy is, but based on hard work and perseverance and on the content of our character. That's what's unique about America. That's why millions of people have come from all over the world to America, because there's no nation on earth that presents the opportunity we have here to achieve anything. Let's take, for example, talking about false consciousness. Let's take young people. There are a lot of young people watching this program right now. You know, if you were to sit down and try to design an agenda to just destroy young people, to hammer young people, to rob them blind, to be honest, you could not come up with a more effective agenda than the Obama agenda. I'm reminded of a joke that Jay Leno told before the last election. Jay Leno said, "So, President Obama is targeting first-time voters." Well, of course he is. The second-time voters have all graduated. They can't find a job. You know, there's a lot of truth to that joke. Just recently, the Wall Street Journal had a long story about what it called the lost generation. All the young people coming out of school who haven't been able to get a job. And you know, it's not just the first job. If you don't get your first job, you don't get any skills, you don't get training, and you don't get your second job, and you don't get your third job. And climbing the economic ladder, the first couple of rungs are so absolutely critical. Hammering small businesses, less than 1% growth for 4 consecutive years on average, is absolutely destructive to young people because they're just getting started, and that harm will ripple on for decades. But secondly, you want to understand Obamacare. One of the simplest ways to understand Obamacare. It is a massive wealth transfer from young, healthy people to everyone else. Billions and billions of dollars being transferred from young, healthy people to everyone else. And finally, in 4.5 years of President Obama's presidency, our national debt has gone from $10 trillion to nearly $17 trillion, to larger than the size of our entire economy. Who the heck do you think is going to pay for that? It's young people. Listen, I think what we're doing to young people is fundamentally immoral. It's wrong to force the next generation to spend your entire working lives not working to meet your priorities, not working to meet the challenges of the future, but working to pay off the debts of your parents and grandparents. And yet that's exactly what's happened. And yet, in this last election, 70% of young people voted for Barack Obama. Now, why was that? Well, I think a big part of it was that false consciousness I mentioned, that a lot of conservatives don't understand that conservative policies work, and they work for those struggling to climb the economic ladder. You know, one of the simplest differences between left and right is both look at the economic ladder, and liberals want to reach down, physically grab people and move them up. And usually that's driven by noble motives, by a desire to help. The problem is, it never, ever, ever works. The only way anyone has ever climbed the economic ladder is to pull himself or herself up one rung at a time. So all of our policies should focus on easing the means of ascent up the economic ladder, empowering people, individual choice, ownership, helping them take responsibility for their lives. Towards that note, I want to point to the 2 domestic policies that, in my view, are the most transformational policies of the current generation, and they are school choice and Social Security private accounts. School choice, I think, is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. You know, school choice has been something the rich and middle class have had from time immemorial. If you're in a wealthy public school district, let's say you're in the Bethesda Public School District, if the public schools there suddenly had a 50% dropout rate, if among those students who were there, 60% of them graduated functionally illiterate, if drug dealers were walking the halls, if young girls were getting sexually assaulted on campus, you know what? Those wealthy public schools would be empty like that. Because their parents have a checkbook. Their parents have the ability either to write a check and put them in another school or to pick up and move to another area. That's been the case. School choice has been the ability of parents, the wealthy and the middle class, to choose an option, a better option for their parents. What is school choice about? It is about giving poor children, about giving children born without economic advantages the same ability to choose an excellent education that the rich and middle class have always had. It is transformational. And the most important impact, by the way, that school choice has is improving the public schools. Because the competition, if you look at the data of every school choice program that has been implemented across this country, consistently what you see is that competition, when suddenly schools don't have their students captive, when the parents and children can choose an alternative, the result is those public schools improve. And education is foundational for every child, regardless of his or her circumstances, to have a full and fair opportunity at the American dream. Likewise, Social Security private accounts. You know, it's a great way, talking about personal accounts, to differentiate the difference between opportunity conservatism and how many conservatives typically think about our issues. Many conservatives, when talking about personal accounts, will put on a green eye shade and they will begin talking like accountants. They will say, well, if you look to the long-term actuarial soundness of the Social Security system, it is clearly imperiled. Now, for some of us, that may be persuasive. But most people tune out when they hear people talking like that. For me, Social Security personal accounts are very different. They are about helping enable those with nothing to accumulate assets that they own and they control. I want you to think of an African-American man working hard as a janitor and an Hispanic woman cleaning homes. Both of them for 30, 40 years work their fingers to the bone. Right now, under the status quo, they pay into the Social Security system. Eventually they retire, and then they get retirement benefits for a few years, and then they die. And when they die, that's it. That's the status quo. Now, if we had a system where a portion of our tax money went into a personal account that you own, that you control, what would happen? That very same African-American janitor, that very same Hispanic woman cleaning homes, working so hard to provide for their family, would pay into the system 30, 40 years. And even at very, very modest wages, at $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a year, by the end of that would have accumulated $100,000, $150,000, $200,000 in a personal account that they own and that they control. And then they retire, they receive benefits for a few years, and then when they die, that's their money. And suddenly their kids and grandkids can inherit $100,000, $150,000, $200,000. Talk about transformational. For that son of the woman cleaning houses, for that daughter of the janitor, to inherit money that they control, they can use to get an education, to buy a house, to start a business. What that does is it empowers those who are climbing the economic ladder. It empowers them individually. Doesn't try to physically move them up, but it helps them gain the tools to pull themselves up. That's what we need to understand. We need to understand that we are right. The reason I am a conservative is because the free market system has been the greatest avenue for the advancement towards prosperity that the world has ever seen. That's what we need to fight and defend. So that's principle. All right, let's talk about backbone. Let's talk about the second element that it needs, that once you have a foundation, once you know what you believe, once you understand free market principles, once you understand the Constitution, once you have spent time getting that freedom works, then are you willing to stand for it? Because you know what? If you know the right answer, but the minute you get incoming fire, you run away and hide, it doesn't do a whole lot of good. And you know, I have to admit, all of us were taught in high school biology that invertebrates can't walk upright. And yet politicians prove them wrong every single day. Why is it that you're in politics? Why are you thinking of being involved in the political world? What's your process? What is your reason for doing it? Listen, there's an old joke that politics is Hollywood for ugly people. And there's a lot of truth to it. There are a lot of people in Washington, D.C. who desperately want to be in an elected office. It's foundational to who they are, that they look in the mirror and they say, I am an elected official. I am a government official. That's who I am. It gives them a sense of importance. Suddenly their jokes are funny. Suddenly people treat them as if they're handsome and wise. Look, if that's why you're thinking about politics, let me advise you, go do something else. Why are you doing this? Look, I can tell you for me, When people ask me why I'm serving and working in politics, the answer is one word: it's freedom. And it's freedom that I know for you, like me, freedom is something that is not an abstract academic concept. It's something that's real to us in our families. In my family, my father's from Cuba. He was born in Cuba. He grew up there. As a kid, he fought in the revolution. When he was 14, he began throwing Molotov cocktails and fighting actually alongside Fidel Castro. He didn't know Castro was a communist, but he knew that Batista was a very cruel dictator. And my dad ended up being imprisoned and tortured in Cuba as a teenager. Today, my dad is a pastor in Dallas. And to this day, his front teeth are not his own because they were kicked out of his mouth in a Cuban jail when he was a teenager. My father fled Cuba in 1957. He came to Texas. He was penniless, couldn't speak English. And he got a job washing dishes, making 50 cents an hour. And working, washing dishes, he paid his way through the University of Texas. He went on to get a job. He graduated. He started a small business. He worked towards the American dream. When I was a kid, my father used to say to me all the time, when we faced oppression in Cuba, I had a place to flee to. Where do we go if we lose our freedom here? And you know what? The answer is there isn't a place to go. That, for me, is why I'm serving in politics, because I don't want to turn to my daughters and tell them that I stood by while freedom went away. If you want to have backbone, the best way to have backbone is focus on why are you doing it? Why are you doing it? Because that helps you focus on, look, if you're fighting for principles to save this country, there's someone throwing a rock at you, someone making a criticism of you, that doesn't really have all that big of impact. I often think anytime someone says something unpleasant about me, you know what, I've never been in prison, I've never been tortured. The worst thing that happens is a little bit of criticism. That's not too bad. And I'll tell you, as much as my father has been my hero my whole life, what I find most remarkable about his story is how commonplace it is. Every one of us has a story like that in our background. We are all the children of those who risked everything for freedom.